So you want to learn how to build organically. Well, me too. So here we are in our creative testing world where I'm going to try my hand at some organic building. I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and my process on how I would go about constructing an organic build. And first things first, we got to find some reference photos. The first thing that you want to do is establish what you're trying to build. So today I'm going to be trying to build a mushroom. So I decided to do a little bit of research on mushrooms in general to find a species or type that I wanted and then specify that type of mushroom to find reference photos. And the species of mushroom that I liked and wanted to build is the Amanita muscaria, or the fly agate, which happens to be a poisonous fungus, but it looks pretty cool, so we're gonna go ahead and build that. And I found 3 supposedly non-copyrighted photos of this mushroom to use as references for this video. And now that we have a couple reference photos picked out, it's time that we try and understand the shape of the object we're trying to build. And the first step in understanding is observation. So we're gonna look at these photos with a keen eye and try and isolate certain shapes and forms. Here we're looking at the stem, and if you notice, right before it reaches the cap, it's at its thinnest point, almost as if the mushroom emerges from the ground, swells up, and thins back down for the cap to emerge. So its thinnest points are going to be right at the entrance for the soil and at the cap. Now we understand the general shape of this stem. But how about the proportions of the mushroom itself? It looks like with this specific mushroom, the stem is as wide as the mushroom cap, and the cap is as tall as this mushroom stem. Let's take a look at our second reference photo. When we take a look at this mushroom, we'll notice that it's quite a bit different than the previous member of its same species. The cap is more like a UFO instead of a bulb, and the stem itself is quite a bit taller, and since the shape of this mushroom cap is different, it exposes the ring or skirt of the mushroom, giving it a slightly different shape. But for this photo, we're just going to focus on the cap. This cap has an uneven and non-uniform profile to it, and it's a lot flatter than the previous cap. And we'll notice from looking at this that starting from the left side, it curls up, stays a little flat, swings all the way back up, and then has a little curve downwards, but mostly stays at the same plane. That is quite an intricate shape. And when it comes to organic builds, there are a lot of shapes and sizes and varying biologies to work with. So a lot of this is personal choice when it comes to what you want to build. And on to our third reference photo. If we take a look at this stem, we will see an entirely different shape than our previous 2 mushrooms. This also has the skirt exposed. We've had 3 mushrooms with 3 entirely different stem shapes, but you can still tell they're still mushrooms. So we know the general side shape of this mushroom. How is this going to help us? Well, we know that stems are cylindrical, and as long as we have a center point, we can change the size of our circles. So if it's a small section on the bottom, make a smaller circle. If the stem gets bigger, go up, make a bigger circle. And repeat that process until you get the shape of the stem that you want. But now we're going to go back to the cap. If you notice on this cap, it has scales. These little white pointy things are the scales of this mushroom, and they stick out from the mushroom cap. And these are scattered all throughout the mushroom cap. We also have a slight change of tone in the red on this mushroom cap, and a few sections are ate away on this mushroom cap. So we've now observed shape, texture, color, and anatomy. Let's try taking it into Minecraft. I think we're going to build this in 2 different parts, the stem and the cap, and then put them together once we're done. When I'm building the starting profile of something, I'm always going to use stone or some other bland block that's going to blend in. This way I can get the profile and shape exactly right, and I can texture it by using the shape and not have to worry about the distraction of color just yet. If it looks like a mushroom when it's gray and carved out of the stone, then I know it's going to look like a mushroom when I add color. Right now, I am going to be focusing on this stem, trying to utilize the observations we noticed in the first 2 reference photos. The squiggly side profile of our stem, and noticing that a stem is rings and trying to grow and shrink those rings as the stem moves up and down. My brain generally works in geometry, so understanding what shape something is really helps me bring it into Minecraft. And this is the stem that we have achieved trying to use that method. I think it looks a little bit too geometric and a little bit too square in places, and I think that we can do better. This is what makes building organically in Minecraft difficult, is you're trying to build curves and flowing shapes with cubes, and that is incredibly difficult. This shape is all right, but I think we can do better. If we notice on this one, we have a whole bunch of square shapes. We have corners and rectangles that are very much sticking out in the overall shape. So I think we're gonna build a second one and try to avoid that. So as we build our circles going up, we're gonna try and make those less obvious and blend in our starting points with the circles below them. One way I'm gonna try and do this is by making this a 2-block center rather than a 1-block center. And I'm also going to stagger the starts of our circles. So we have our first circle, which is the 2x2 square. And then our second layer is going to merge a 4x4 square by having 1 block underneath it stick out. And that kind of breaks up the pattern of circle on top of circle if it kind of blends together, or at least that's the way that I think about it. But we're gonna keep that idea all the way up this stem and continue building circular layers. This is definitely looking way better. You can tell that this is expanding and going up, but it's doing it at a slow rate. You can't tell exactly where the start of our circular layer is. All you can see is that it's slowly growing. At this point, I've started to collapse my circles and work my way up the stem. I'm gonna work my way up using the same technique with the collapsing circles, trying to blend them all together so the start of each layer is not quite as noticeable. I've made my way up to the very top of the stem, and I've also added a little bit of flare outwards to kind of mimic the shape of the skirt and give it that little squiggle profile. I kind of like that. I also took away a few layers at the bottom. I thought it came in a little bit too steeply and it looked a little awkward, but I like the look of that one way better than our first try. That looks natural, it has texture, and overall it looks interesting, even without color. We have a pretty good looking stem made, and I think it's time that we move on to the cap. And since our stem is a 2-block center, we are going to start this with a 2-block center for the cap as well. We can also apply the same slice circle method that we used on the stem to the cap. Since the cap is more like a quarter sphere, it's still made up of larger circles. It's just a little bit more sloped than the stem. I don't actually like the way that this one is turning out. It's looking a little bit too geometric, and I don't like it. So we're gonna start over on the cap, this time with a slightly different method and slightly different starting point to try and work this out. This is a method I like to use when trying to work out complex shapes in Minecraft. I'll hop over to a program like 3D Paint, something where I can zoom in and see the individual pixels, and I'll use those as block substitutes and try and jot out the shape that I want to achieve in Minecraft. Here I'm going to be trying to work out the profile of the cap, so I'm going to be drawing an archway in the general profile of what I think the cap would look like in Minecraft. This helps me visualize how it's going to look in one little slice of the cap, and I can work out the details of 3 dimensions later on. So once we figure it out in 2D, we can then move it over into Minecraft and build it with blocks. Similar to how we did here. This isn't exactly what I did in 3D Paint. I did tweak it a little bit because it looked a little funky once we got it into Minecraft, but in theory, this would be the same 2D drawing that you did in 3D Paint, just built with blocks. And once we have a 2-dimensional shape that we like, we're going to build a second one and have it cross over itself on a secondary plane. And then we'll have the start of a 3-dimensional model. This squiggly X shape is essentially wiring for 3-dimensional modeling. This is the basic profile of what our object is going to be, and now we just have to connect it. And how I'm gonna connect this is with the same thought process that we did with the stem, building up circles. These little wire frames are essentially the peak of each circle. So I'm gonna build a new circle with each layer going down. It's starting to look like something, but we're having the same issue we did with the first stem. It's looking a little too blocky and a little bit too geometric. So once I go down a few more layers, we're gonna do what we did with a second stem and try and blend out our transitions with the start of each circle. That is worlds better. It's looking a lot less blocky, and it's actually starting to look like what we want. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish out the rest of these circles and see what it looks like in the end. Honestly, I don't like it. I think now it's starting to resemble a sombrero more than anything, and it doesn't scream mushroom. And you're gonna have that. You're gonna think you'll like something, and then when you actually do it, you just hate it. And that's exactly what we have here. So I'm gonna take the portion that I do like, that being the center, right to about the lowest ring, and we're just gonna use that as the top of the mushroom. I also think that would probably be a little bit more in proportion with the stem, so I think that'll work out pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and use our handy dandy little vanilla copy and paste tool, the structure block. I'm gonna use this to move around the top section of the cap and the stem. If you don't know how to use this, I have a very good tutorial on my TikTok. I've gotten all the pieces and parts put together, and that looks fantastic. I am pleasantly surprised with how well this came out. But of course, this is only the shape of our mushroom. We still have to add color. But that's definitely looking like a mushroom. I've selected a couple blocks that I would like for the color of the stem. These are slightly yellowish blocks. If we notice from our reference photos, the stems of all of these mushrooms are in the whitish yellow hue. So I picked out the blocks that I thought matched that the best. My favorite being the bone block, so we're gonna use that for most of the stem. The other colors and shades of blocks I am mostly gonna be using for texturing to try and get the feel of the scales that are on the stem of this mushroom. I'm going to try and texture it with color rather than depth or shape. I might tweak that a little bit more eventually, but that is our colorized stem. I think the yellows are a little bit too yellow, but that is the closest thing that I got to the color that I wanted. So overall, I'm happy with that. We've got the stem colorized, and now we're gonna move on to the mushroom cap. If we notice in this reference photo, the mushroom cap is generally one singular shade. However, it does go into a lighter shade around the edge. So I've put together this red gradient that we're gonna put all around the cap in almost a polka dotted scheme, kind of like it's wilting or changing color as it gets to the edge. One other detail that we could add is if we notice on this reference photo, this mushroom has portions of the cap eaten away from insects or other things, and it turns into a lighter yellowish white color. We could add that, but for this, I don't think I'm going to. Instead, I'm just gonna pick a random point on this mushroom cap and start moving outwards in a gradient, trying to match up the color to the red concrete. Personally, I don't think it matters at all where you put these little dots. This is an organic build, meaning every single one that we build is gonna be a little bit different. So I'm not putting too much thought into the placement of these dots at all, as long as it looks decent, doesn't look obtrusive, and they're all kind of different. I think that's all that matters in an organic build. That's looking pretty good. That's definitely a mushroom. We could stop there, and I would still call that a mushroom. But if we look back at our reference photos, we have these little white spiky things, also known as scales, that we have to add to our mushroom cap. These definitely appear to be sticking off of the mushroom head, and they appear in a randomized pattern, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing too. We're going to be taking some slabs and just popping them off the top of the mushroom all over the place. I'm not going to be putting too much thought into these as long as the individual little spots look good to me as well. That actually looks like it's supposed to. That's awesome. Okay, so now we need to work on the underside of the mushroom cap and work on the gills. I'm not entirely sure how to go about that, just because it's a little complicated of a shape. I think that I'm just going to make the underside of this mushroom cap a randomized pattern between all of the lighter blocks that we've used in this build. That way I can kind of get the desired effect of different shades without the effect of the lines of the gills. I'm not sure how well that's going to work, but this is just the way I'm thinking about it. Our mushroom is looking gorgeous. The underside, it looks all right. We could have probably done something a little bit different than a randomized pattern, but I'm still extraordinarily happy with how this turned out. That looks like a mushroom. That is a mushroom. That is still a little geometric. It's a little flat. We could have tilted the cap a little bit and it would have looked a little bit more natural, maybe put a bend in the stem, but that's a really good mushroom. That is a mushroom. I hope you learned something with this tutorial and my methods of organic building. Truthfully, it was more me just messing around with how I would achieve a goal, but I hope you learned something and I hope it was helpful. I had a lot of fun building this mushroom, and if you're curious, this is my pixel art version of a mushroom. I showed a little bit of this clip earlier on, but this is the finished product. But if you thought any part of this was helpful, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Hopefully, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.